Hello, everyone. We are so glad you were able to join us this evening for what we feel is going to be a wonderful talk. Hopefully, it's informative. We hope that it is something that makes you think, but then also helps you just thinking about your time and concepts in the legal profession. We're going to get started. As I said, so my name is Jamila Tucker. I am the district vice justice, or the vice justice for the Brooklyn Alumni Chapter. Managing the technology for us this evening is Renee Kamiko Hasman, the justice for the Brooklyn Alumni Chapter. The Brooklyn Alumni Chapter is a sect of the world's preeminent law fraternity Phi Alpha Delta. The purpose of this fraternity is to form a strong bond uniting students and teachers with the members of the bench and bar and fraternal fellowship. The Brooklyn Alumni Chapter seeks to advance the ideals of liberty and equal justice under the law, to stimulate excellence in scholarship, to inspire the virtues of compassion and courage, to foster integrity and professional competence, to promote the welfare of its members, and to encourage their moral, intellectual, and cultural advancement, so that each member may enjoy a lifetime of honorable, professional, and public service. We want to welcome you today to the Identity of the Black Lawyer in honor of Black History Month. And hopefully going forward, we want to be able to let the voices that matter and that are sometimes not always seen or heard in our profession to be known and to be heard. A few housekeeping items today. All participants are muted upon arrival of this discussion. We ask that you place any questions that you would like asked to the panelists in the Q&A box. We have allotted time at the end of this discussion to get your questions answered by these fabulous panelists. In addition, this event is being recorded today, so you guys will see us we're in webinar format, but just to let you know, we are recording this for few that were not able to make it this evening. And so if there is no further ado, we're going to get into the biographies of these wonderful panelists. Frederick K. Brewington is the principal of the law offices of Frederick K. Brewington in Hempstead, New York. Raised in Lakeview, Long Island, Fred Brewington is a respected lawyer and community advocate with a distinguished legal career. He earned a Bachelor's of Arts degree in sociology from the State University of New York at Albany in 1979 with honors, and a Juris Doctor degree from Northeastern University School of Law in 1982. After working at a number of prestigious firms and as a clerk at the Office of the Legal Counsel of the United States Senate, Mr. Brewington began a private practice on Long Island. With his expertise in civil rights litigation, he has successfully challenged the at-large voting system in the town of Hempstead, town of Islip, and worked on preventing future unconstitutional and discriminatory purging of voters from the voting rolls. Mr. Brewington also challenges other discriminatory practices throughout Long Island as well, with a sustained focus on issues such as affordable housing, community revitalization efforts, employment and civil rights, the environment, and especially voting rights and fair representation in government. He was the recipient of the Leadership in Law Award in 2013 and the Leadership in Law Lifetime Achievement Award in 2015 from Long Island Business News. Welcome. Landrise Felix, Esquire, is an attorney from Rockland County, licensed in New York and New Jersey. Her experience includes immigration law, New York and New Jersey no-fault law, and civil defense litigation. Landrise is a proud Haitian background, the eldest of two children born to a registered nurse and electrical engineer. She graduated from the State University of New York at Albany and New York Law School and is currently practicing civil litigation in the greater New York City area. Landrise has been recognized by the National Black Lawyers as top 40 under 40 and by Best Lawyers Ones to Watch. Welcome, Landrise. Jesse Bulluck, Esquire, is a first-year PhD student focusing on educational leadership policy at Texas Tech University, where he researches issues involving student discipline, diversity and inclusion, educational equity, Black male student achievement, and minority student opportunities. Specifically, he is most interested in the intersection of the criminal justice system with the education system, taking an in-depth look at the development of the police-school relationship, the use of police officers for handling student behavioral issues, and the criminological theories influencing the development of educational policies. Jesse is a native of Rocky Mount, North Carolina. He completed his Bachelor's of Arts in Philosophy and Bachelor's of Science in Biology from Howard University in Washington, D.C., and he also earned his JD from Howard University School of Law. Most recently, he completed his master's degree in criminal justice from North Carolina Central University in Durham, North Carolina. Previously, he has served as a research and policy assistant with the late State Senator Ed Jones at the North Carolina General Assembly, as an intern with 1st Congressional District Representative G.K. Butterfield, Regulation Council law clerk at the District of Columbia Bar Association, and as an intern with the Office of Governor Beverly Perdue in the Office of Community and Faith-Based Research. Welcome, Jesse. We are so glad to have all of you here. The purpose of this discussion, and one of the reasons we wanted to present this event this evening, was to get an idea, an honest idea of what it's like practicing in the legal profession or the legal adjacent professions as a Black attorney, as a woman, as basically anybody that is not what is considered the central standard norm that it's usually plastered all over us when we're thinking about law. So, I wanted to open up the question with if all of you, this is for all the panelists, can think back to the time when you knew or strongly felt that a career in law was what you wanted to pursue, and what was that moment?
Well, would you like me to go first?
You can start.
Since mine was probably a long time ago, it's important for me to first say thank you for the opportunity to be amongst each of you to chat and also to share with each other. We are experiencing a single time together in this country and in our nation as members of the people of the diaspora. But we also are in a situation where we have the ability to span on this screen alone, a couple of generations. And I think that's important because we need to be in communication with each other all the time. There's so many things that we go through and have gone through as a peoples that we can ill afford not to know exactly what the jig is when stuff has happened and be able to share that with each other. So I'm happy that we have the opportunity to do that and do that collectively. If I can find something later on, I'll drop a little piece later on for us to listen. But with regard to my practice, I started, back in the 80s, the mid 80s, but I thought I was going to be going to law school and becoming a lawyer when I hit the latter part of my high school career, when my business law teacher at that time said, you're going to go to law school. Her name was Miss Friedman. She was a white woman, a Jewish white woman who used to watch me always advocating for somebody and somebody's issue while we were in high school. And I would say, sure, Miss Friedman, whatever you say, just like we oftentimes do. But as I went through college at the University at Albany, where Sister Felix and I are both proud alums, I learned that my sociology degree was only going to take me so far, and that my theater training was only going to take me so far. And I looked at the other student government people that I was engaged with at the time, and so they were all going to law school. And I said, well, I can do that too. And then I heard Ms. Friedman saying, you're going to law school, in my head. And I applied and got into quite a number of law schools and ended up going to Northeastern. And it was there where the whole energy of law, the whole concept of where there can be an opportunity to impact society from a legal standpoint got into my bones. Denise Carter-Binea, a Black woman professor, challenged me and taught me constitutional law the way I should learn it. And as a result of that, I came home and started looking for work that I could do in the community in the area of civil rights. And that's when it started. So to Ms. Friedman, who badgered the heck out of me, I say thank you. She's not with us anymore, but we kind of have to remember those things too.
Thank you. Landrise?
Good evening, everybody. So first and foremost, I'd also like to start out by, giving a round of thanks first to Jamila, who I have quite a history with. Not only did we go to Toro Law together before I transferred out, we also met at SUNY Albany. So, it's a Great Dane reunion. Indeed. And I'd also like to thank the Brooklyn Alumni Chapter of Phi Alpha Delta, which, funny enough, another kind of full circle moment, I pledged Phi Alpha Delta Phi class of Fall 08 at SUNY Albany. So it's really just a come together moment for me. And I'm really appreciative that Jamila thought of me when she was putting this panel together, and that I have the opportunity to give and take, from the experiences and whatever everybody else has to say here, and hopefully provide, my experience and that somebody can take away from it. So my story's a little cliche. I've kind of always wanted to be an attorney, like from the time I was young. Just the passion of debate, of standing for a point and being able to rebut other points. My parents would tell you I was just really talkative, but for me, it was like, no, I have arguments at 5. Yes, it's about whether or not it's really necessary that I have to eat the plate of food. So from the beginning, it's always been, Landrise is going to be a lawyer. She has that back and forth. And as I got older, just the type of personality that I have, people have always reflected that to me. People have always, come to me for advice, because they're just like, well, you're rational, you're level-headed, you always know how to look at both sides. And as I've gotten older and as I've grown, and as Mr. Brewington said, just going to college and really then being exposed to resources that can help you understand how you want to navigate your life, I was like, this is what I want to do. It's not just a dream you have at 5 years old. Now I'm an adult, I'm practicing, and I really do feel like this is what I was meant to do.
Wonderful. Jesse, how about you?
Great. I want to echo the same sentiments as my fellow panelists, and thank you for putting this together. As a member of Phi Alpha Delta, this is definitely something that I have wanted to see kind of come to the forefront for a long time. So I'm glad to see Brooklyn and Alumni Chapter kind of take that lead on this particular topic. For me, I am probably, I guess, the anomaly when it comes to the legal profession, because I had no interest in law whatsoever growing up. Never paid attention to it, never thought about being a lawyer, I didn't even watch legal shows growing up. It just was not something that was on my radar. As you heard from my bio, I was a biology major, and that was because I was a biology pre-med major when I entered college. Growing up, I always wanted to be a doctor. That's what it was from like 7 years old all the way up until I got to college. And what changed for me was I had an internship one summer with a healthcare facility. And, over the course of that summer, just making the rounds with the doctors and talking with different healthcare professionals. The single incident that stands out is we were in a room with the patient once, and the doctors, prescribing the course of action that the patient should take concerning their issue. And the number one, or the first question that came out of the mouth of the patient was not about the treatment options or anything like that. It was about the cost. And this was in 2003, mind you. So the patient was more concerned about the cost of what they needed versus, you know, the actual thing that they needed to get better. And so afterwards, the doctor and I, we had a surprisingly open and candid discussion about that exchange that happened in the patient's room. And from there, you know, it really got my mind going and thinking about, okay, if I become a doctor, I can help, you know, patient by patient. But truly the issue is on a grander scale. And I would love to do something more so in the policy realm of things. And so, you know, short story is I talked with an advisor about it. And even though I remained a biology major, I switched into sort of, she suggested law school, and that's when I first started looking into this. So this is like junior year of college when I first get an inkling to start looking at law school and policy and that sort of thing. And from there, it just kind of took off. I literally switched my Kaplan prep class from the MCAT to the LSAT. A few months later, I'm applying to law school. It just kind of happened all of a sudden, but you know, it went smoothly, and I was very fortunate to get accepted and matriculated at Howard. So, you know, not your typical path, but that's how I got here.
I think that all of you spoke to, you know, the diversity that comes when it comes to even thinking about law school. You know, whether it is you knew it from a young age, whether it is you somewhere in the middle of your life or in the middle of, you know, college, you were encouraged as a person who was younger and then thought, oh, okay, here we are, or it's not on your radar. I think, you know, oftentimes people think everybody who's a lawyer knew they were going to really be there. Just like if you knew you're going to be a doctor, that's how you're going to know. And it's nice to hear the variances and the diversity that comes in even entering the legal profession. So with that, and all of you now knowing, yes, I want to be an attorney or I want to be in the legal profession, what were you most looking forward to about that? Jesse, you mentioned helping others and policy changes, but, you know, I guess from not having that, not necessarily viewing legal shows or kind of being exposed to it even when you were younger, what did you think like law school and law was going to be about, that you had that moment, was like, yes, I can't wait to be able to do this?
Okay. Yeah. So certainly, I guess I should say the only thing I knew about the legal profession, I was, I guess you can't classify me as a history buff, but I love to read as a kid. So I did a lot of reading, and I love learning about Black history because unfortunately my school didn't teach it. So, you know, it was something that I wanted to read on my own to learn. So the only thing I knew about law, or at least my idea of what the law was, you know, Brown v. Board of Education, Thurgood Marshall, you know, fighting, using civil rights to fight for school desegregation. And it was sort of personal for me because I come from a very special place in North Carolina where we actually still have 3 separate school systems, which, you know, people don't like it when you say it, but they're segregated. I mean, they are basically along the lines of race. We have 2 predominantly Black school systems and 1 predominantly white school system. So from a very young age, it was always in my face. My mom, as an educator and an administrator, she taught in the white school system. And even in that times, back in the 70s, the 80s, and the 90s, she was like 1 of 2 Black lead teachers in the entire system. So this is something that, again, from a very early age, I just saw things in black and white because that's what I grew up in. So going into law school and thinking about the legal profession, you know, the only thing I knew was I have to go in it to fight against all of these obstacles and things that we face as Black people in the United States.
Thank you. Professor Brewington or Landrise, and either one of you wanted to jump in.
Sure, thank you. You know what? Let me pass it on to Sister Felix because I'm thinking about something. Let me try to work it out in my head.
Sure. You know, for me, it's a lot more personal. Like I said, from the time I was young, just being able to really dissect and understand and make simple the most complex arguments for people to understand. That's always been really important to me. Like, and even now, outside of being an attorney, people will come, like, they'll call me and be like, Landrise, did you see this, like what this was, or what happened, or this, that, and the third? And I'm like, yeah, so, and they're like, what does that mean? And I'm like, that's completely outside my realm of, like, and they're just like, yeah, but you know how to take important and like complex things and make them small. Like, you know how to, and I've always found that as an attorney, that's one of the most important things to do, is being able to take loads of information and make it into concise arguments. And I found that in all aspects of my life, not even like just as being an attorney, but everywhere. It's always better to be able to take a lot and make it a little. You save people time, you save people aggravation. And for me, those are very important things. So being able to just help somebody understand something has always been really important to me, because like Jesse, I've, again, not a history buff, but loved to read growing up. But for me, it wasn't even about specific topics. I just like to read, learning, like learning new words. I was the kid who would sit there and read the ingredients on the cereal box while eating cereal at night. Like, who knows what riboflavin is? But just the thought of being able to absorb information accurately, concisely, that's always been like my driving factor.
Excellent.
Mm-hmm. I hear you, Landrise, talking about learning for the sake of learning, and that's an important lesson we just need to keep passing on to folks. There's a great value. I mean, we know, and we've been taught in our community that knowledge is power. Mm-hmm. And also the other thing, particularly with regard to the fraternity that we find ourselves speaking with this evening, the special skills that you learn as a lawyer are to take that information, put it in a good category, and make it as concise as possible, so that you boil it down to the bare bones. And that's a great skill, and it's a special skill, though. It's a special set of information. It's a special skill that our community really relies on us to be able to help do, because I know each of us in our own families has somebody in their family, if not more than one, that when found face to face with a complex issue and having to deal with the complexities of government and everything else, simply just don't know where to start. Right. Don't know how to reason through those things, or get caught in some minutia that puts them in a tailspin. I think that's an important point that you brought out. With regard to me, I was advocating all the time for somebody, but I think back to the decision that I made. I mean, I was very much involved in the divestment movement of corporations in South Africa, including the Sunni system. And I remember standing outside the president's office with a bunch of folks, and I'm not going to tell you how many, and saying, I won't say the words I was saying then, but making it very clear that we weren't going to take no for an answer, that we wanted Sunni to divest all of its funds from anything that was connected to the apartheid regime in South Africa. And it was at that point, when we started dealing with those issues, that it became very clear to me that articulating things in the public square was simply not enough. Articulating it in the public square is important, but it also became important for me to be able to say, I've got to be the impactor, as Charlie Houston talks to us, and those are, I see the folks here from Howard, but it tells us that we have to be social engineers. And how do we do that, and where do we do that, is important. So that's one of the things that propelled me to want to do that bit, to take it from being in the public square, and then getting squarely in front of somebody so I can get in their chest with legalese.
Okay, so that's powerful, and I'm actually hearing, as most of you had stated about your communities and where you started from, taking that and now going into law school in the law in general, you know, when it's your career, or even when was the fact that you were Black in this space, right, that is not dominated by us, right? When did it become present and effectuate and impact your experiences, or at least had the strongest in this profession, in law school, in your careers, things like that? Like, did you come in with it like, I'm Black, I'm trying to be an attorney, I know I'm gonna struggle? Or did you kind of go into it like Landrise, for you, I always just wanted to be a lawyer, and then, you know, certain things triggered you that let you know, like, oh, I'm a Black lawyer?
Well, for me, it's I think it's a little bit of the latter. You know, I'm not to say that I'm naive. Obviously, you know, I'm Black, and, you know, growing up in this country, we all know that there's no escaping that. You know, nobody ever not notices. So, but that I was never really worried or concerned about how being Black would affect my being a lawyer. And honestly, I give a lot of that to the community that I come from. Like you read in my bio, I'm Haitian. And if you know anything about the Haitian community, the top 3 professions for them: engineer, doctor, lawyer. That, like, those are the top 3. So for me, from the moment people found out, they were just like, oh, you want to be a lawyer? Then you're going to be a lawyer. Like, because we need that. We need you, you know? And that's a really, I think that's probably a more subconscious driving factor, is the fact that being so tightly knit in my community, my church, my parents' friends, you know, I grew up with, people laugh at me now, but I have church friends that I've grown up with from the time we were all in diapers, and now we're all adults, professionals. And, you know, those are still people that are very close and dear to me. And, you know, those who are watching now can definitely understand. There's so many people now in the church who are just like, well, Landrise is my lawyer. They don't need a lawyer. They're just so proud of the fact that they can say they know one. And it's not until I actually walked into court, and it wasn't for anything huge, like, you know, like it was for a calendar call, I believe. And I walked in, and I was literally the only Black person there. I think there were 2 other women, but they were older. So I walk in, and I'm probably the youngest, one of the few women, and the only Black person. And that's when it kind of dawned on me that, yeah, you made it, but that's not enough because of who you are, you know? And that's really when imposter syndrome is a real thing, you know, for those who understand what it is. The feeling of, do you really belong in this space? Are you really good enough to be here? You know, like that is when I had never really felt that before, you know, going to college, going to law school, taking the bar. I'd never really felt that part of it. There were other parts, you know, just the general anxiety of, you know, am I going to pass? Am I going to do this? But walking in there and really seeing that I was the only one in that space was really then being like, wow, you know, it's not that you're a lawyer, it's that you're a Black lawyer. Like, I do have to take responsibility for that title, for that position, because that is who I am.
Yeah, that's powerful. That really is powerful, and I think more folks need to come to that realization sometime and just look around you. Because when you look around you, a lot of times, as Richard Pryor said in one of his famous skits, it's just us. Mm-hmm. But in that situation, it's not. In that situation, sometimes it's just you. And whose shoulders are you standing on, and what is it that's required of you in that space, so that you are not only doing what you need to do for yourself and your client, but also for what those other folks have in their heads and their minds, so you can debunk that. But one of the things that, and I'm just going to do a reverse on that a little bit. One of the things I started doing early on was as I was doing appearances and things of that nature. It would be regular. I'd be standing next to a client, and it happened a couple of times. I'm standing next to a white client, and the judge speaks to the white client as though they're the lawyer. And it was at that point I just said, well, either I can let that happen or I need to be bodacious. And basically just said, and would state on the record, take control of the record and say, Your Honor, I'm the attorney here, but I'm not quite sure why you thought my client was the attorney. Could you explain that to me? And that is not going to make you popular. But that really isn't why you got here, to be popular. You don't have to be, outrageous, and you don't have to be abusive, and you don't have to be in a situation where you're trying to create enemies, but you need to try and call things for what they are sometimes. And we now know that because the terms of implicit bias and all that is current today. It wasn't when I started. It wasn't, and if you did not dig in right then, the likelihood is that you weren't going to get the respect. But I think that that's part and parcel of where we have to be right now. I will tell you that your reputation as a lawyer will precede you before you even get in the courtroom. Once they know who you are, see who you are, and learn how you comport yourself, the court officers will know you. The law clerks will know you. The staff will know you. And rather than just saying, okay, next case, they're going to say to each other, Miss Felix's case is next. And that's where we start to change that. And I just love the fact that Jesse is talking about, policy issues, because sometimes we think that it's all about just, the one case that we have, when we can really start to deal with things from a systemic and systematic standpoint to change policy that then starts to lay the groundwork for us to be able to do the work that we do in the courtroom.
So for me, I'll take you back to a story about when it first kind of hit me. As a kid, as I told you, I grew up in a very segregated part of the country. And so because of my family's background, I got used to kind of oscillating between a bunch of different circles. So, when I'm with my mom and her predominantly white colleagues and their kids, I know how to function there. Fine, I feel comfortable. When I'm around my friends, we're running around barefoot in the country type thing, I know how to function there. And so, I, from a very early age, just learned how to kind of just maneuver back and forth between all these different worlds that I was in. But I went to predominantly Black schools my entire life, and then I decided to go to an HBCU for college, and then the same thing for law school. So in a way, I was kind of isolated in a bubble, all throughout school. And one of the things I started doing as a senior, and then I continued to do as a 1L, was I worked with this international law firm, large firm in the DC area, and we're there, and as a first-year law student, this is a pretty big deal. And one of the lawyers on the case that I was working on comes in, and like every other major firm, they sponsor holiday parties and all of that sort of thing. And at the time, I had my locks. I started growing my locks in undergrad, so I had them as a first-year law student. And he comes into the office this day, and he comes directly to me in front of everybody, and makes a derogatory statement out loud for everybody to hear regarding my hair and the holiday party that's coming up. And obviously that did not go over well with me. I'm a very quiet and reserved person, but I'm not shy. And it didn't go over well with me. And I didn't act out at that particular moment, but I certainly made a complaint and let my grievances be known to the powers that needed to know. And then we had to have a discussion about it the next day and that sort of thing. But that was literally the first moment that I knew, or that it just dawned on me that, hey, you're not going to be seen by some people as just an attorney or a law student. Like, in those few seconds, he reduced me from being a law student to just being some random Black person who he did not have any respect for, and felt that he could just say whatever too. And so I hope in that by me speaking up and saying something that he maybe learned in that instance to kind of think twice about things. But yeah, I have lots of those stories to kind of tell if you want more of them.
I mean, I think that was the crux of a lot of the questions for it. You know, we all go into this profession because it is a prestigious profession. However, there's a lot of professions in the world that you say, oh, I'm this, and then people go, oh, that's nice. But we know that when people hear you're a lawyer, you're a doctor, you're an engineer, you know, their eyes change, right? Oh, the tone of voice goes. So with that, my question is, being that you had this awareness in all forms, whether it be in the courtroom, whether it be as a first year associate or anything like that, has that driven you to take positions or go after opportunities that normally wouldn't be offered to you, or has that caused you to shy away from taking particular roles and positions in the legal profession, one way or the other, whether it be leadership, whether it be cases, right, in a law firm? Has that given you like, oh no, I'm definitely going to go do it, or has it caused you to be like, I don't want to deal with the trouble, I don't want the headache, I just kind of want to heal, or both? How has that driven you to go after work? I definitely want to start with Professor Brewington on this one.
Well, I'm probably a lot like Sister Felix in that you know, I got some stuff to say at points, but one of the things that folks should know is that I'm an athlete, or was an athlete. I still consider myself an athlete, and competition is like running through my veins. It may not necessarily be the first thing out of my mouth, but you know, coaching high school football, I still tell folks to strap up and let's get this on. And the reality of understanding that someone might say you can't do something is just the reason for me to say, well, just step back because I'm about to kick this door in. And that is some of the realities of what happens when people start to put those stumbling blocks in front of you. You've got to make some decisions on whether or not how high you're going to kick, or whether or not you're going to step back. And that's happened to me over and over and over again. The reason why the Gooseby case, Gooseby versus the town of Hempstead, came into my mind is because I lost an election for town board. And when I ran on Long Island in 1987, yeah, 1987, y'all, I should have won if it was based on merit. I should have won if it was based on debates, because I was creaming people. I mean, I was in East Meadow and I was going to these places, and by the time I left, people's jaws were on the ground, and I'm just saying, okay, don't forget to vote. But when the votes came out, it was clear that there was this concept of racial block voting that was going on. So if I ran in the Black communities, I would have won, but there were no districts. So I looked at that and I studied what happened in Kissimmee, Florida, and happened in North Carolina, and happened in Tupelo and all the other places where voting rights cases had been brought, and looked at this and said, well, I'm not going to take that out. It's not okay, because there's a reason why there's nobody that's my skin hue, my color, or my degree of hair has ever sat on the town board in the town of Hempstead, and we went to work at it. And I recruited a plaintiff and recruited some plaintiffs, and then got the legal help that I needed to do to try and make that change that was necessary to be able to elect an African-American to the largest township in the United States, that being Hempstead, or as we just finished a lawsuit against Islip Town to open that town government up to the Latino community. It was the sense of saying that you can do what people say you can't do, and knowing that you've got the capability to do it, finding the resources to do it. So in that situation, I would just say that's part of the impetus. And the other thing is that you want to be in a situation where mediocre is not good enough, right? It's not satisfactory. It's not good for me. It's not good for you. It's not good for our young men, our young women in our community. We need to strive to be excellent at all the times, because that excellence allows us to be in a situation where we can then force our way into the room. And that's really what we have to try and push. So that's my short answer to a very deep question.
Okay. In terms of, I really want to pick up on that, and I want to add to this question more so, and gear it toward Landrise. We've talked about some of the difficulties that we've experienced and you guys have experienced as Black lawyers, or being Black in the legal profession. But what's it like as a woman? Having that conversation, right? Because there are so many areas of intersectionality that happen. And, you being the woman on this panel, I wanted to take it there, just see what your input is on that.
Well, it's funny. Being a woman and being typically one of the younger, if not the youngest in the room, it really shows you like people's unconscious bias, just in the way they greet you. From the time I walk in, the greeting that I get as a Black woman is different from when other people walk in the room. People feel like they have to, I'm not sure if it's a match my energy type of thing, like, because there's we all know that people have assumptions about how Black women are supposed to be. And Jesse had brought up a good point about, oscillating between culture. Code switching, we all know how to do it. We all know what it is. Like walking into a space and feeling like you have to put on the proper face for the room that you're in. And being a woman, I found that I have to, first of all, people give you this fake sense of courtesy. Like, it's just like, oh, well, ladies first, or, I'll give you a good example. We at the old firm, a prior firm that I worked at, we were having an office meeting, and my supervisor, he was a white man, and the meetings were pretty relaxed because it wasn't a large office. There was a couple of people who worked there, maybe 4 or 5 attorneys, and then 2 or 3 paralegals in that office because it was a satellite office. And, sometimes things would get, informal. We would crack jokes and do things like that every once in a while. You're not supposed to curse in the office, but we're all adults, And he made a joke. It wasn't disrespectful, at least not to me. I didn't take it as such. But then he turned around and he was just like, oh, pardon me, I don't use foul language in front of ladies. And I was like, well, I'm more offended now that you feel like you have to apologize than what you actually said, because what's the difference between the 3 guys sitting here and me? And again, it wasn't anything crass. It wasn't anything, chauvinistic or sexist. It was just a joke, but he happened to curse. And then he was just like, oh, well, there's a woman in the room, so I have to. And I was just like, sir, I went to school just like you. I argue cases just like you. I deal with people just like you. What is the difference? What is the difference? And it's those little things. It's the micros as opposed to the in your face, because we live in a society now where everybody's walking on eggshells, with all of the things that are coming up in the professional realm, with race, with gender, with, sexual orientation. Everyone's walking on eggshells. And people don't realize that it's the eggshells that hurt. Like, you ever get cut by an eggshell when you're cracking an egg? Like, it's sharp, and people don't understand that in trying to maneuver instead of being genuine, you're putting those biases in my face. I can tell that you're uncomfortable with how you're acting because I'm a woman, as opposed to you just treating me like a person instead of treating me like a woman that you have to be different around. What's the difference? Because we're both professionals in this. I wish I could say that it shouldn't matter whether you're a man or a woman, we're all lawyers, because that's what they tell me when I'm in the interviews and I'm coming on and I'm like, well, you know, what's your diversity like? How many women are partners? How many of them are Black? How many? And they're like, well, we're all lawyers. Until I get there. And then all of a sudden it's, oh, well, you know, if and this and you didn't, I watched you and you didn't do that for the 3 other male colleagues who walked in first. Why? And because people blame it on me being a millennial, I'm not shy to ask you why. Like Jesse said, I'm conservative, but I'm not shy. So when I do bring it up, then it's, oh, well, hubbada. There's no reason for you to look at me differently because I'm a woman, because we're here to do the same job. If this was a position that had any relevance to our genders, I could understand that, but it doesn't. So.
Well, you segued well into the age conversation as well. And, you know, I'm younger, I'm not gonna lie, but for either Jesse or Professor Brewington, did you notice a shift? Or even Landrise as well, as you have gone from, we know there's an inexperience that is assumed when we're coming fresh out of law school, but as you progress in your career, in terms of, you know, what's happening, whether it be in not just in the courtroom, but in firms or in compliance or even in corporations or government sector, everything. Have you noticed that? Is it one of those things where it's, as you get older, you get more, there's more respect, or as you get older, they start to phase you out? Like, how has age played an effect on your legal professions?
I'm not going to let my age forget to turn my mute off. That's a profound question for a couple of reasons. One, it does depend on the individual, I think, on whether or not you want to and continue to remain relevant in your own space. Because your ability to impact and command respect, not just expect it, but command respect, also does depend on your affect and how you are comporting yourself to require that of people, no matter what your age is. And some of it may come with age and the phasing out, which I definitely see. Just by the way, I look at some of my colleagues, and you know, and I'm assuming they're years old, who are just my same age, and they've just decided, I'm stepping back. I'm not going to push anymore. I'm not, and that you can make that decision, but then at that point you do start to get a little bit putting the learned elder thing to the side for a second. You start to become less central to the conversation of society. And being central in the conversation of society is something that, you know, folks look forward to in a lot of ways, retirement and things of that nature. As a result of that, sometimes, you know, that does become a part of the evolution of and passing on of the torch. But I think it also requires the individual to decide at an early level, going right through their career, that they're going to remain relevant and they're going to remain connected to the needs. I mean, you know, Landrise needs me to be able to talk to, right? And Jesse needs me to make that phone and say, hey, Reverend Butts, there's this great man that I just met, and I'd like you to talk to him at Abyssinian Baptist Church, right? Because of his background and his history. We need to make those connections. And sometimes those doors that need to be pushed open are reliant on folks that remain relevant in our own communities so that those doors can be opened. Not just in, I mean, and I'm just not talking about trying cases. I mean, I try more cases in a year than most people try in a lifetime, right? And that's, to put me in front of a jury and hang on. I mean, that's the way I look at it. But it's more than that. It's becoming that aspect of how we then can try and pave the way so that it's not going to be necessarily smooth, but it's a lot more smooth because you're there. And because you're able to do that. And I think that that's something that we need to do more for each other as a community. I mean, I just know that there are times when stuff goes down and I look at somebody, and I'm going to stop on this in a second, but I look at somebody and I say, why didn't you call me? Just why didn't you just pick up the phone and say, this is horrible. This is what this man just said. Help me think through this. Because of the training that we have, two heads are better than one in most situations. But a lot of times we think that we got to stay in our own heads, and we don't have to, because there's a fraternity like this, or there's a community that makes up a greater fraternity in our communities that we don't rely on. And we need to, because that's how we build community. We need to build community.
Here I am showing my own age. I almost hit me.
Gotcha.
That's a perfect segue into the next part of this conversation. I think, we've talked about some of the roadblocks, the things that we've experienced, the things that you all have experienced. But of course, it's not all gloom and doom, right? We want to talk about the resources and the solution side. And so the next question that I have for starting with Jesse is, what's the impact of, mentorship or sponsorship from whether it be other attorneys, we're talking about legal profession right now, but even just those in the Black communities and professions that attorneys come in contact with that have helped you? And, I'll start by just saying that I remember when I had my first pro bono case, I was representing someone who had never had any priors, never had anything in a criminal aspect, and they needed help. And I called Professor Brewington on the phone and said, I'm standing outside Brooklyn's courthouse. I have no idea what I'm doing. I had taken one class with him. I had no clue, and he said, okay, this is what's going to happen. You're going to do this, you're going to do this, you're going to do this. And as much as it was a 5-minute phone call before a case, it mattered. So Jesse, have you had mentors? Have you had people who kind of sponsored and brought you through? And then how has that helped or harmed?
Yes, definitely. I've been very fortunate to have many people that I would consider mentors, or at least people that I admired and looked up to throughout my life. Maybe one of the first ones was actually my band director in high school. I did music in school, and I only got to spend my senior year with him, but he was young, fresh out of college. And, I told him that so from where I'm from, if you went to college, you more than likely stayed within North Carolina. At the time, North Carolina had a pretty decent higher ed track. So, there were some good schools here, but I wanted to kind of step outside the norm, and I decided I wanted to go to Howard. And that hadn't been done in decades. No one from my school, from my area, did that. And so he was one of the main ones who really encouraged me to pursue that, and that it was possible. And then later on, getting closer to the legal profession, I told you I made that switch in my junior year. So, going to my first law school open house, I was completely lost. I had no clue what to ask, what to do, just nothing. You know, had that been a medical school event, I knew all the questions to ask. I knew what to say. I knew how to sell myself and all of that. So I'm literally there just lost. And my advisor, Dr. Georgiana Boca-Cole, was with me. And so she just kind of held my hand, so to speak, and guided me through it. But then, you know, she would walk away and just kind of let me be on my own and kind of feel my way through it. So she was definitely one that kind of helped at that very early initial stage. And then the next thing that really sort of gave me a lot of foundation to prepare for law school itself was there's a program at the Georgetown University Law Center called the Charles Hamilton Houston Law School Preparatory Program. It's run by Mr. Donald Temple out of the DC area. And so through that program, that was where I really, you know, just understood the legal profession and then understood what my role would be within the legal profession as a young Black attorney, because that was something that they instilled in us as sort of students in that program. You know, one of the first things he had us do was read the Dred Scott opinion. You know, that was the very first thing we did, the entire case, and, you know, discussed it in class. And so that sort of set my framework for how I should think as a lawyer and things that I should sort of do. And over the years, you know, when I've run into him, he's always walked up, pat on the back, like, you know, to see you grow from this kid in 2004 who had no clue and couldn't stand up and, you know, recite the court system. They had us also like recite the court system from complaint all the way through to adjudication. And, you know, I could stumble through it my first time, but, you know, eventually learned it. You know, he remembers that, but just to see where I am now, he's like very proud of it. So, and there are many others along the way, but those are some of the ones that really, for me, set the tone for what I would become later on in my legal career.
Well, I've had the traditional mentors, I guess, for our industry and, you know, our profession, and non-traditional. And I think that's important because you want to be able to, at least for me, one of the professional mentors that I had, I was able to see myself in her. Again, being younger and, you know, looking to really start a career and really, you know, make a place for myself in this industry, and seeing people who down the line have done that and are willing to impart that knowledge. Like Fred said, you know, we do need to have these mentors, because I need somebody to fall back on. I don't know everything. He doesn't know everything. None of us know everything. So to have a good support system through mentorship, I do think that is really important, because it's an exchange of not only ideas, but of experiences, of, you know, cultural knowledge, just different viewpoints. And I think that helps professionally and personally. And that's why I say that you should have non-traditional mentors also, you know, people that you want to see, or not that you want to see, but people that you can model yourself after if you're still struggling as to who you are as a person, removed from your profession. You know, you can go to school and be a lawyer or whatever it is that you want to be, but to really stand in who you are as an individual, as a man, as a woman, I think it's important to have those mentors outside of your profession to really be like, you know, that person in what they do, I see how they stand, you know, for themselves and for others. I see how they carry themselves. And that is something that I can take and use in my own profession. You know, I think the exchange of ideas and the exchange of experiences is the most important thing in mentorship, being able to bring something that you might not otherwise have been able to think for yourself. And I think that works in both ways. People tend to think of mentorship as a younger person being mentored by an older person, but that doesn't always have to be the case because, again, people have different experiences. You know, I've met people outside of the tri-state area who are my age, but coming from, you know, either the West Coast or from down south, or maybe even international, to be able to exchange those ideas because they've gone through something different, something that I would probably never have experienced in my course of life. That's a mentorship, you know, to take those experiences and being able to use them to better myself, and in bettering myself, be better for when it comes my turn to mentor somebody.
Oh, okay. I didn't know if Professor Brewington was going to say something. Okay. So, you know, mentorship is great. And this is going to be a harder question. Mentorship is great. Sponsorship is great. But one of the things that I think they don't always tell us or talk to us about, let's talk about money, right? How has, right? How has salary and actual dollars and cents influenced where you have gone in your legal career, or stepped away from, or maybe not have taken anything of those? How has money actively affected you, because it's a resource in this journey?
Maybe I should start, since I'm not paying back any student loans anymore. You've got to put something else in there as well. You've got to put some faith in there. You've got to, and again, this is me, and not everybody sees it the same way, but I had to step out in some time and not just be concerned about how that next thing was going to be paid for, because life required me to have my head wrapped around the concept that there's something that's going to happen and it's going to be good, but you got to go for it. I ran some campaigns in Manhattan, Long Island, was doing a bunch of stuff after law school, did not-for-profit stuff, worked for the Lawyers Associates, doing low-income and moderate-income housing in the South Bronx and in Brooklyn, helped to rebuild the South Bronx. And I just kept saying, well, there's something more I want to do. And I was working for folks. Then I ran some campaigns, worked for C. Vernon Mason. And then at some point I just said, I think I'm just going to go after this. I had plenty of contacts in the community. I had church contacts. I had folks that were supporting me. I had people that were asking me those questions, Sister Felix, like, well, you should know this. You went to law school, and asking me all the time. And I'm saying, well, I don't, but I know where to look it up. They taught me how to do that. And I went and took an office. I had $1,500 in the bank. I had my law school notes and everything, and I took that lease, and I realized within the first 3 months I had earned more than I had earned in the past 2 years. And I was working night and day. I was working like a dog. I still work like a dog, but a big dog. That's the omega in me. Excuse me, y'all. But as a result of that, and I stepped out on faith. I really did. And that doesn't always, come out to be the way we want it to be. But I had to have some sense that there was going to be something that was going to pop off, and it did. I had built some skills by that time. I had built that I could do real estate work, and I could do personal injury. I taught myself how to do that. So through that work, the real estate work, which I was doing closings all the time, I was doing real estate work all the time. I was doing personal injury cases and getting them in, figuring out how to work the meds because of my background in athletic training. I had a good background in medicine. Jesse, you'd be great because you got all that bio behind you. That allowed me to step out. And then finances, there are always times when you have desert. right? But there's also times when you have oasis. And working toward those each time allowed us to grow from me renting that single space at 401 Broadway on Manhattan, just below Canal Street, and to taking that entire suite over and having everybody rent from me. And that happened within a period of 2 to 3 years. And it was that constant going at it and then making the determination, well, Manhattan is fine, but I'm seeing my clientele is largely Long Island based and Queens based. So I moved my practice out here and been out here since. But it's been, for me, it was a little different because I was not looking for the opportunity to work for someone else. I had that entrepreneurial aspect in me that basically said, let's see what that looks like, and willing to do that. Not everybody is built for that. Because there were lean times when I looked up at 2 o'clock in the morning and I had to say, what's going on, Lord? You know, I needed to say that. And sometimes we need to do that, to realize, you know, as we look at that opening chapter in Roots, where you say, behold, something greater than thou, right? And that's a realization that comes in a lot of different forms and fashions, but that was part of it for me.
Well, for me, I mean, let's not kid ourselves. Money is definitely one of the top 5 factors, because we spent a lot to go to law school. And all throughout law school, they kept telling you, this is an investment. I don't know how many times I heard that going to the financial aid office. You're investing in your future. And so you get out of school and you're like, okay, so where's the return on my investment? And, but Fred, you make a very good point. You do have to step out on faith, because you know what you're worth. You have to prove to everybody else what you're worth. And that takes time. It takes time. It takes a lot of hard work, you know? And again, being a panel of Black attorneys, we have to work twice as hard to match the mediocre of our colleagues. So already we're behind 2 steps. And for me personally, I'm, you know, obviously I haven't built a wonderful wall behind Fred of of experience, but you know, for me, I came from I had a background in immigration because I started out in immigration because of the area that I'm from. Rockland County has a largely Haitian population, and it's very working class. And I'm fluent in Creole. So I was like, oh, well, you know, take a skill, run with it. And I did immigration for a few years. And the hardest part of it is the fact that you are dealing with people who don't have. And so oftentimes what you think is a reasonable retainer agreement or worked out ends up being pro bono work, because they just don't have it. You know, and they teach you this in law school, you know, is it worth it to go after this? It's not worth it to chase after these clients who you knew were struggling to begin with because, you know, they're out of status, or, you know, they're working 2-3 jobs to even stay in the country, and then something happens. And so while I started it because I really did think I could, like, you know, make a difference, I also was staring at my own student loans afterwards, and I had to make a decision. And I say this now, and it was a few years ago now, you know, I've been working in civil litigation for a couple of years now. That's a lot more prestigious, for lack of a better word, because I'm working on the defense side. So I work with major corporations and insurance carriers, things of that nature. They don't have any issue paying their bills. So I'm never concerned with where the paycheck comes from. But the more I progress in my career, the more I kind of look back and I'm like, I started immigration because I knew I could help people. And I'm not one of those philanthropic. I don't lie about it. I'm not philanthropic. I'm not, oh, I want to be a lawyer because, you know, I want to change the world. No. want to be a lawyer because, like I told you before, I know I'm good at it and it does make good money. But at the end of the day, to much is given, much is required. I know that the Lord has put me in a position here, and this is just me being faith-based. You know, I'm imparting my beliefs on anybody, but that's just how I was raised. The Lord put me here to make a difference. And while I can make money, I can also make a difference. So for me, I now I'm thinking about ways, you know, pro bono clinics and things of that nature, to be able to do that while still working my regular job, being sure that I'll make the money that I know I deserve to make. Because I did just recently switch firms, and I felt that the amount of work sometimes that you're kind of taken advantage of, and this more so, I'll speak to working at a firm as opposed to working for yourself, Fred. When you work for somebody else, they're going to get as much as they can out of you, whether they pay you what you're worth or not. And it got to a point where I was burnt out from the amount of hours churning. All of my friends were like, Landrise works harder than anybody we've ever seen. She's always on her laptop. She's always working. She's always answering emails. And while we all know what we're coming into, you know, this is not an easy profession. We know that it's a lot of hard work. You do also have to be compensated for your time and your efforts. Because again, we all paid to go to school. And my time is valuable. So while money is not the driving factor, it certainly is one of them. You know, you should be fairly compensated for the time and effort that you put in at a firm. And if you own your own firm, as Fred does, then, you know, you do have to have those nights where you're looking up at the Lord and being like, so, but it pays off, you know, like patience is a virtue. And that is something that I now in my career am learning, is that patience is a virtue. You might not see it now, but you know you're working for something down the road. And you just have to keep your eyes focused on what's down the road. And my father just recently told me this, like, more is not always more. It's not always more. You know, because it depends on what it is you have to. Nothing comes free. My dad says all the time, the only thing you get in this country for nothing is nothing. So you are always making an exchange. And you might think it's in your benefit, but only time will tell. So you really have to keep your priorities in check when it comes to that. While money is a factor, and the moves that I've made have been financially driven, they've been financially driven because I've seen the amount of work that I was giving wasn't being valued the way that it should have been. And that's something that I do encourage people, especially us, especially Black lawyers. You will get lowballed in this industry. You will, because they will not see the value that you have. In my interviewing recently, working in the tri-state area, I had a conversation with a recruiter because I asked a question about the firm, you know, what percentage of their partner track is African-American. And she was embarrassed to tell me they didn't have any Black partners. And it stemmed into a conversation of, well, why? And then she told me, she was like, you know, I actually have a really hard time finding qualified African-American candidates to place. And I look around, I'm like, we're here. What do you mean you're having a hard time finding them? We're here. Are you really looking? And the ones that, you know, they do find, they lowball, and then we leave, and then they turn around and complain that we're not available. So it's a conversation to be had on both sides. For the attorneys, yes, but also for those people paying the attorneys. That is a conversation to be had. I understand you're running a business, but your business runs because of who you have on your team. Respect the people you have on your team, personally, financially, professionally.
That actually leads into a question I was going to have, because when you were picking, or when your practice area was picking you, or your policy area was picking you, or anything like that, often we do see Black attorneys, we go into certain areas of law, whether it be from personal, you see, we're higher in criminal, we're higher in immigration, we're higher in certain areas. Did you ever at some point in time feel that you couldn't make a financial decision or go after particular roles because of the impact it might not necessarily get you for the Black community, or for anything like that? Like, you couldn't opt, or you didn't want to opt for a particular firm because either they weren't aiding in the Black community in some way, or you felt you felt like that you weren't allowed to make that money decision or take on a client that was something in that area?
That actually, that has a lot to do with why I left a prior firm, is because I found that there's a lack of diversity at a lot of places, but it was glaring there. And I guess it became so glaring that the client essentially kind of had you guys need some more diversity conversation with them. And that kind of led them to have this like influx of hiring. And it just felt so superficial. It was so superficial that it got to a point where it was like, I'm almost disrespected by the fact that it's a perfect example. 2020 was quite an eye-opening year for a lot of different reasons. And one of the things that I guess I appreciated with a grain of salt was that the pressure that society put on big business to see the racial injustices happening out here, I say appreciate with a grain of salt because it was kind of like, well, finally, you guys are acknowledging what we've been trying to tell you this whole time. And, just seeing, going on LinkedIn and seeing firms put out statements about Black Lives Matter and about, how all of a sudden people were putting up, how diverse their industries were and how they were looking to better the diversity and the culture of their industries. And in all of that, I heard nothing internal, nothing at all from anyone. And they had essentially staffed a minority office in the span of like 6 months. And it looked good. But then when it came time to actually use that as a foundation or a stepping stone to improve their stamp, I guess, in public, in the society, they just so dropped the ball that it kind of made me go, do you guys even see us here? When the whole incident with George Floyd happened, nobody could ignore that. And yet they found a way to. And after that, it just left a bad taste in my mouth because I was like, if you guys can really just be so cold. I understand we're all professionals and we all know that there's supposed to be, a line between personal and professional. Everybody tells you to leave your business at the door, but we're people. We're people in the office. We're people outside the office. And there are certain things that I feel you can't just sweep under the rug. Mm-hmm. And yet that's what happened. And it made me realize how really I felt like a puppet at that point. Instead of valued, I felt taken advantage of. Like, oh, here I am thinking that you guys are using me for my expertise, for my skill set. And, like you've conglomerated us all here to do better. And we're just window dressing. Because when it really came time for you to use us to make a statement, you said nothing.
Very interesting.
Yeah, I felt, and that really drove me to then really pay more attention to diversity and corporate structure. Because before that, I was really one of those people like, I don't care. I'm going to be a good lawyer no matter where I go. It shouldn't matter that I'm Black. I know that I'm Black, but it shouldn't matter. It matters. It does.
It does.
I couldn't ignore it anymore.
Fred, do you have you, in terms of your practice, and I'm going to ask both you and Jesse individually, have you in your practice either taken a client out of the fact that for the impact that it can in the Black community, or do sometimes people ask you about your rates and your services, and then they assume that because you're a Black attorney that you will either give them a lower price, you will do work for free, you will somehow have this area because you're a Black attorney? Or do they kind of go, at this point in your career, you're like, hey, like, let's not make any assumptions?
I can answer that. Yes, 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 and no. Yes, people assume a lot because you're an African American, and they come to you and say, well, you know, I don't want you to charge me what somebody else over there in the other community would charge me. And I would say, why? Because my hourly rate is higher than theirs. Many times people will come to you and expect that after you do the work that you didn't earn that. So why should I pay you? That is disappointing. And there are many times there have been clients that we've taken on because we think it's the right thing to do, and we know that we don't expect to get paid. But it is the right thing to do in some situations. And then there's other times when we just don't take cases because of the expectation that people have, and the expectations are all wrong, and it's not healthy. And we have to make a determination. I'm sorry, I can't help you. And that we have the ability to do that in our office. We turn down approximately 70 to 75% of the cases that come to us because of the federal litigation that we're engaged in, because case selection is important, and also not giving people false hope. People see these $1 million verdicts and turn around and say, my case is worth this. And really, your case, when I do the analysis for you, is not worth the money that you're going to pay me as a retainer. And I need to tell you that, and you need to know that. So the answer to the question is yes, 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 and no.
And then Jesse, to you, is when you're picking, because you're not necessarily in litigation, you're actually in policy work, and specifically having this conversation in your focus about school to prison pipelines, education system, the connections of the criminal justice system. When having this legal background, when you are choosing your policies, when you are doing the research, or even opting to bring more awareness to them, have you found that you sometimes either aren't given do the policies come to you because you're the Black attorney in the room, or do you find that it's also the conversation about you having to do more work to advocate for it because it's just an issue in the Black community, as it seemed, air quotes on that one?
Right. It's a little bit of a mixed bag. Some of the issues that I focus on and research on in particular, I've been very intentional about doing that and making those statements. There have been times when I've thought about sort of going the safer route or the easier route for people because it's more digestible for them. But that thought usually doesn't last with me too long, because I want to be an advocate for my community, which is the Black community. And so I'm very intentional about putting it on my CV and putting it in the faces of people within my field. And while I'm still new, I'm just in my first semester here. So, I'm still brand spanking new to the world of academia. But I make it a point to talk with my advisors and talk with my professors when we, earlier in the semester when we had our discussions about my research interests and, just trying to see where I would fit into the program. I told them point blank, this is, I want to research these issues as they pertain to Black students, and in particular, Black male students, because I am tired of seeing, not only, so when I went to graduate school to do my master's in criminal justice, I went with the intention of studying police shootings of unarmed Black men. Like, I put that in my statement. And that is what I studied when I was there. When I started transitioning over into the education space, and I wanted to combine criminal justice with the education system, again, when I sent in my PhD application, I was very intentional about it. I said, I want to study this issue concerning minority students and the interactions they have with police officers on campus. Like, why are they on campus? And so for me, I'm very intentional about the areas, the policy areas that I am researching and studying. And one of the things I did prior to starting the program was, I started networking with different professors across the country. And one of the best piece of advice I got was to go into the areas that I had the interest in and that I felt that I wanted to work in, and that over time I would find my tribe. They were like, the people who do that work, they're out there. They may not be noticeable from the very beginning, but they're out there. And as you continue to go forth, you all will find each other. And truly that has been what has happened over time, just in different conversations I've had with people. Either, they'll say, oh, that's not my area, but I know the person who does do this. And then they'll direct me to that person and we'll have a conversation, and they'll just, you just continue until you start putting together your sort of your group of people who focus on the things that you do. And so, that's where I am. I'm very intentional about it, and I have no hesitation in telling that to my advisors. I'm the only Black male in my program right now, in my cohort. So, some things are just going to be expected, or at least I'm assuming that, but I'm also not afraid to mention it. I've gone to professional conferences and I've been the person who's raised their hand and say, okay, I'm at my first criminal justice conference, and literally there are like a handful of us there. And I'm thinking, of all the criminal justice issues that impact the Black community, there's only a handful of us here. And like I said, I'm not shy. I'm very reserved, but I'm not shy. So, my hand goes up and I ask the question about police shooting Black men. And then it becomes a whole like, oh my God, I can't believe he just asked that. And I'm like, yeah, because it's an issue. So what are we going to do about it? Let's talk about this and let's have this conversation. So I'm never afraid to kind of just be bold and ask those questions out loud.
I think that segues perfectly into my last question that I have before we open the floor for the audience questions. What are some of the other resources that those connected to the legal profession can look at? We've talked about money, we've talked about mentorship. Just off the top of your heads quickly, what other things had a positive impact on you growing in this legal profession, and what are some areas, especially now that we're in a virtual space, right? We see that this change has adjusted a bit and we have more access, as Fred was mentioning earlier. What are some other resources that you think had a good impact on your journey, and that those in the audience should really be thinking about going forward?
It depends on the work that you're engaged in, for sure. Depending on what type of resources you need to have. I guess one of the things that helps us a lot is that we built a strong relationship with other professions, including those professions that we need to be successful in the arenas that we step into. Experts, people that we can rely on for quick and appropriate opinions, medical people, and treasuring them in the way that you should, in terms of the relationship you have, not just in a using situation, but also just making sure that, for instance, I have a demographer that I've worked with over the years doing voting rights stuff. Because of the relationship that we have and me relying on him so much, it's not unusual for me to pick up a phone and just say, what do you think about this? Or can you shoot me a quick map that shows me this? And that relationship is built there. One of the things that I'm finding is extremely important for some of my clients is trying to get them help, in times of famine, before their case comes in. Social workers that I built relationships with, very important people, because they can help clients maneuver, even though we can figure it out, they can help clients maneuver and stay afloat in some situations where they might not otherwise be able to make it through. And there's a lot of folks that are suffering out there. So as a result of that, those are just some of them, but there's a lot more for sure.
Jesse or Landrise?
To piggyback off of Fred, I think a very underutilized resource is lateral networking. Issa Rae had made that a very good point. Look, this is a perfect example. Jamila and I know each other from college. This was a lateral networking. She didn't necessarily look above her. She looked to the left and to the right and said, who can I reach out to who is similarly situated to me that can help me in what I want to do? And I think that we, as lawyers and just in general, need to use our personal lives as resources. Reach out to people. Don't be afraid to ask questions. I think that's probably the biggest hindrance for people, is that fear of looking dumb or fear of the people will think I don't know. No one knows everything. The only way, one of the things that I say is you don't know what you don't know until you find out you don't know it. Ask questions. Look to the left and to the right of you. Like he just gave a perfect example. He knows social workers and people in different areas. You might not always be thinking in the professional sense, but sometimes if you remove yourself from that, you could be sitting in your office at work, like face deep in whatever issue that you're dealing with. And, you're just like, oh man, this issue, that. And then if you just take a step back and just kind of think about who that could help, not necessarily what you know, but who, because that's what they say. It's not what you know, it's who you know, that is a great resource. And for me, it always comes back to the exchange of ideas and experiences. It could be something that because you don't have the proper experience with, you don't understand, but you could call up, a friend from college who happens to now be a social worker and just vaguely discussing the issue. And they give you a whole new viewpoint that you're like, wait, that makes sense. And now you have a fresh new idea and a new strategy to fix the problem that before you were racking your brain for. Lateral networking, I think, is a very underutilized resource. You don't know what other people know until you ask them. Mm-hmm. And the worst answer you'll get is, I don't know. And then you're not any worse than where you were when you started. So just ask.
I think that's great. Jesse?
Yeah, I'll say very quickly, definitely look to professional organizations, and don't be afraid. Like if you're the only poster that looks like you, just step in there and do it.
Yeah.
Like I said, I'm never shy or bashful to do that. Like, yeah, I'll step in and do it. And then also don't overlook what would be considered small opportunities or small things. So like a lot of experience that I've gotten sometimes in areas has come just through volunteering, or serving on a committee, serving on a council, where I'm not going to be compensated for it, but I'm using that opportunity to kind of lend my voice and lend my knowledge to work on some community issue. And in that, you start networking, you start meeting people, and especially if you're working in the governmental policy area, a lot of it comes through just being in the right place at the right time, and knowing people knowing your name, that can sort of parlay you into other positions that may be more beneficial to you, either financially or just professionally.
I think that's great. Thank you guys so much. I know that Professor Brewington is a busy man, and so he has to step out. We had one question that popped up, and I definitely did want to bring it to everyone's attention. The question was, it's a two-parter, but it says, what other microaggressions have you experienced in this profession? And what's a good way for allies to start the conversation about race and actually mitigate some of those microaggressions? And I preface this with, I understand that we have been asked often enough to do the work of the educating of our counterparts in order to make them more comfortable. I know that I'm going to start that off with the conversation of do the work, do the research, right? You can't trust that all the Black people in the room are going to give you the answer. Mm-hmm. But, just what are some of the areas, if you can, and I know Professor Brewington, you have to go, that an ally can start and really make an impact in our profession?
Conversation, a lot of times where you jump off makes a difference on the relationship you have with the person. So there's some folks you can jump right into it and, and start kicking it with them right away and start to raise issues. I always find that it's helpful to get people in a position where they're not feeling particularly threatened, and you're letting them know that I'm not threatening you with anything. I'm not accusing you of anything, but I am asking you to think about what just happened. I am asking you just to think about how you might want to help address that issue that just happened, because I don't necessarily need to be the one that broaches that question, because right now I'm angry. And I need you to step in to do that. And you saw what happened. To thine own self be true. You step up, because you've told me that you know what's right and what's wrong. And that makes people rise to a level, or you find out what they're really made of. Folks will demonstrate who they are based on what they do. And sometimes you got to give people that opportunity. I'll just tell you, I was speaking to a pastor the other day, and I wanted him to host a press conference at his church. And he was talking about, oh, this is great work you're doing on the police reform work. This is great, super good. And I said, well, we'd like to hold a press conference when we release the People's Plan out here on Long Island in the basement of your church. Oh, well, I'm not quite sure how that's going to go with my board of trustees and, the other pastors in the neighborhood. And so my response was that, God bless you, and thank you so much, and I really appreciate that. And we went ahead and launched that stuff, and it was fine, but it made me really realize that, that superficial stuff gets tested sometime. It gets tested, and when it gets tested, the chickens come home to roost.
And you always have a little side eye afterwards once they show who they are. Yes.
I'm going to have to go.
Yes. Thank you.
I'm hosting a meeting for coaches. We're starting our football season. We got notice that we can play football, and we're starting to get ready. But I just wanted to tell folks, thank you so much for the time. And I would encourage this conversation to continue. This is a wonderful start. And I think that I'm more than happy to make myself available to any and everybody that's on the call, but also for the organization. I thank you for being there, because for a lot of folks that came before you, it wasn't necessarily available.
Thank you for joining us this evening. Have a good evening.
Okay, good night.
Good night. I'm going to just continue this with our remaining panelists. So answering the question as well, what are some of the ways in which allies can really have these conversations with us and to empathize, and not just empathize, actually, to do the work, really is what the question is more so. How can they start these conversations?
Well, honestly, I think you put it really well, it's to do the work. It's 2021. Everybody knows how to use Google. The information is literally at your fingertips if you care to look it up. And for me, I guess I speak with a bit of bias, because too often I have been asked to be the educator. And Fred made a good point that it's not always the best role to be in, because you are angry. Often because the issue that you are now asked to educate is an issue that you just experienced and that you are slighted from. And it's like you have to learn how to put the onus on the aggressor. Like Fred said, we're all adults. You're presenting yourself as an adult who has reason, who has common sense, and who can distinguish right from wrong. Take a step back, review what just happened, and tell me, if the roles were reversed, how you would feel about it if you were in my shoes. And I feel like we need to make allies comfortable in being candid, because sugarcoating things doesn't help anybody. And when it comes to the topic of race, everybody, again, walking on eggshells. Everyone is so scared to say the wrong thing that you end up saying the exact wrong thing. Whereas if you had just been honest and asked, hey, I'm not sure if this is an appropriate thing to, like, what effect does this have? Or just be candid about your ignorance instead of covering it up. Because I've found anyway that the latter, it just comes off as a slap in the face. Like, oh, so now all of a sudden you didn't realize that that was a wrong thing to do. And then it becomes, well, no, I didn't know. Why didn't you ask? We're, again, like, and this is in a space where everybody is an adult. Be candid. Be open, be honest, because that's the only way people can exchange information. If you don't ask, you'll never know. But don't necessarily ask the person who's suffering from the thing that you're looking to figure out. There's so many other resources available. Again, if you can Google, Jesse brought up, there are different organizations that do whole seminars and webinars and put out information, on these topics that usually are available to you at little to no cost. Your employers now are more and more requiring, diversity and culture seminars and things. Pay attention to the things that are said in those meetings because they are relevant. They might seem cliche when you're sitting there listening to them, but then 3 weeks down the line when you're, for people who are maybe still in the office and, you walk up to your minority coworker and there's an exchange and now you find yourself in that very situation that you were laughing about at the diversity and culture seminar. It's like, pay attention to the differences that people have and respect those differences that people have, because we're not here to make you feel more comfortable. That, to be completely candid about it, it is not my responsibility as a person of color to teach non-people of color how to respect people of color, because you should be respecting everybody. And as an ally, if you run with that mentality, you should be respecting everybody, then it shouldn't be too difficult to have that conversation in that space like it would be to have it in any other space. Because the morals are the same. The foundation is the same. It's respect. That's the foundation of it. Respect. If you approach it respectfully, then it's a genuine conversation. Whether or not the other person is willing to hear, that's a whole different other story.
Right, right. That is, and I think that's great. I think, Jesse, you're going to say something.
Yeah, I was going to jump in there. I sort of take a different or slightly different approach. I certainly understand the sentiment behind, at this point in 2021, you got to, start from somewhere. You got to educate yourself at this point because the information's there. So if you want it, then you do the work behind it. But for me, as someone who is a soon-to-be educator, I welcome conversation. I enjoy, I guess I do enjoy having those kind of controversial, hot-button topic type conversations with people. Like, I don't shy away from it. The only thing I say is, before we start this conversation, I want you to know that respect is number one, just like Landrise said, number one. I'm going to respect you. I expect that same respect in return. And then from there, I tell them, it's a judgment-free zone. There are no wrong questions. There are no wrong statements. I mean, obviously, there's some things you probably should be mindful of before you say them. And you should say it in a way that's not going to be, completely offensive to me, because I'm going to respond to that. But if you're ready to have that conversation, I want you to have an open mind about it. And I'll have that conversation with you, but if you're going to kind of fight me at every single turn or kind of rebut everything I say, well, then I'm going to shut that conversation down, because it's not going anywhere and I'm not going to waste my time on it. But if you're ready to have that conversation, I will absolutely welcome a conversation about any topic, especially racial issues, with anyone. Like, we can have it, we can hash it out. I can teach you about it. So, like, for example, I told you I started growing my locks in college, and I had them through my first year of law school. And then I cut them off, went back to my close cut, fade, and all that kind of stuff. And I kept my close cut for 8 years. Well, I started growing my hair back. You can't see it now, but I started growing it back in 2014. So, of course, by that time, a lot of people are seeing me at work, and they're like, you know, you went from this close cut, now you all of a sudden you have a fro. Now all of a sudden you have these little twisties in your head. And now all of a sudden you got these, like, what's going on? Like, that was the first time that they were witnessing somebody kind of go through that whole process from start to finish. And, you know, I would get a lot of random comments. And I'm the type of person, if you say something out of your neck to me, I'm gonna check you. You know, like, you're not going to run with it. So I'm going to say something to you. And of course, then that would be very off-putting. They're like, whoa, I can't believe he said something back. Or, you know, you come up and touch my hair. Yeah, I'm going to touch your hair back, or I'm going to hit your hand, like, just straight up. Because again, that's just me. Like, my mom is the only person that can walk up to my hair and touch it. Like, nobody else. Like, you don't know me like that. So, you know, I like for people to know that you can have those conversations, but you just have to do it in a very respectful way. And I have sat and walked through the lock process with so many of my white colleagues because they just didn't know. And they're like, you know, do you wash your hair every day? And I'm like, fine, I can answer that question for you. I can talk you through it, you know, not a problem, because I want you to ask those questions. I want you to know. And then, you know, it's funny to me that now, years later, they'll be in a conversation with me and they're like, yeah, I was telling somebody that, no, you can't do that to a Black person. You can't say this. You got to say locks. You can't say dreadlocks. You can't do this. You know, they've become, you know, I guess, allies in a sense, you know, that now they can sort of articulate to others that, you know, this is what it is. Like, it's not something crazy, you know.
I think that's relevant. I think the biggest thing is, you know, outside of respect, and the same way we approach our profession is actually the same way we should just approach people, right? Be inquisitive, but do the work, right? And do the research and think before you speak, to an extent where there's a difference between thinking before you speak so that you are respectful, and thinking before you speak so that you are politically correct. I think we've spent in enough years in the fear of what the dialogue might bring. I think that's really what it is. It's the fear of what the dialogue brings instead of just being in it and experiencing it. So I think as long as we, you know, Jesse, what you're saying is we welcome the conversation, so long as we are not then burdened to have to be that's what I say, burden, right? So the education is, if you unwillingly place that burden on someone to educate you because you didn't want to do the work, that's one thing. If somebody welcomes you to ask the questions and then we're in a dialogue instead of me having to be in a monologue at you, those are two different scenarios. So I think that is one of the greatest ways that an ally can do that. Have an actual conversation instead of
absolutely
trying to be given all information at once.
I do want to just say, like, it's to clarify a point. You know, I'm not an educator, like Jesse is, but I definitely am always open to the conversation. I'm just very firm in that I am not going to allow you to place that burden on me. I from the beginning, if you come to me again. I've had people, again, I don't know if you can tell, my hair is also locked, like, and I have an undercut, like, I have all types of things going on. So, you know, I've definitely gotten all types of questions about my hair. It's funny because I made it kind of like a personal goal. Every time I've had a job interview, I intentionally did not twist my roots. You are getting me at my literal most natural. Like, and again, that's not to say that they were ever messy or unkept or anything, but when I first started locking my hair, it was my first year of law school. And to my surprise, the pushback wasn't coming from the professional realm. It was coming from my family and friends because of the stigma that we have to go with. It was just like, I have a hair pattern that has traditionally been considered good hair. So a lot of people were upset. That's a whole different topic that we'll have to get into on another day. But, you know, a lot of it was, this is your first year of law school. You're supposed to look like a professional. You're going to lock your hair. No one's going to take you seriously. I said, bet, watch me. And it was that kind of, you like, there are certain aspects of education that I definitely do welcome. And it's stuff like that, teaching you that what we learned was right, was professional, was, you know, clean cut, isn't necessarily true. So in things like that, absolutely, I totally welcome those conversations. People ask me all the time, you know, you get the, do you wash your hair question? And it's just like, something like that, okay, you know, but again, the same way, don't touch me. Don't, because it becomes, and it's like, I don't know, I don't know that we'll ever know, but there are certain spaces that would never even be considered.
Right.
And so why does it seem acceptable in that space? Because you can claim ignorance to it?
I think it's just a respect of persons, a respect of place, a respect of everything. So I think that that's the best thing. As long as you lead with respect and you lead with honest inquiry, I think that this will be, allies can do so much work, and we're welcome and we're ready to have here. And I think this conversation as a whole, this entire evening, was centered around, we wanted to have that candid conversation about our experiences in this profession so that we can open the dialogue. You know, we're going to be closing soon. So if there's any social media handles or contacts, I know that there might be other questions that people didn't have right in this panel, but maybe want to ask personally to the panelists. We will gladly share their social media handles or their websites or anything that they want to. And we do want to mention that this event, we're so happy that we were able to have it. And one of the reasons we were able to have this event this evening is partially because of the wonderful sponsorship of Phi Alpha Delta's Inspiration Fund. We want to thank the executive office for their support and ensuring that the voices of our various communities are able to be heard. And we hope that if you enjoyed tonight's event, that you continue to look out for more like this from the Brooklyn Alumni Chapter. We want to make sure that we are an active reflection of the things that we want to see in our fraternity, and that conversations in this that are so honest and so necessary and keep us networking and keep us attached to each other in the gatekeeping, it continues. So we definitely want to thank you for joining us this evening, and we want to thank the audience for being such wonderful participants. I mean, this information was necessary and a breath of fresh air, and what a way to close out the month. And we hope that this conversation, as we've said, keeps going.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you for having us.
Yes. Just want to reiterate that. Thank you so much for thinking of me and Jesse and of Professor Brewington. And we look forward to what you guys have coming up next.
Thank you. Feel free to reach out to us. We will be sending that information. Thank you for attending the Identity of the Black Lawyer. Have a good evening.